There are basically two kinds of medical devices, prescription and over-the-counter. Devices are classified into three different classifications. Devices not subject to pre-market approval are things like tongue depressors and scalpels and gauze pads. These are Class 1 devices, which are considered the most benign. And again, although manufacturers of medical devices must register with the FDA, must list the products that they're selling annually, there is no pre-market approval required for these Class 1 devices. Class 2 devices do require a pre-market sign-off by FDA. The theory of approval of a Class 2 device is that it is substantially equivalent to an already approved device. I was a young lawyer at Miles Laboratories in 1977, and at that time, Miles had a division which was involved in, the Ames division involved in a lot of glucose testing and a lot of work with diabetic patients. And our science division came up with an artificial pancreas. And the device law was new at that time. And we talked internally about whether we would be able to get this artificial pancreas approved by FDA on an expedited basis. And one of the scientists in the room said, you know, an artificial pancreas is nothing more than an infusion pump and, you know, insulin and an algorithm and some sort of feedback assessment. And everybody agreed with that. He said, and all of those are well-known things. So why don't we write a 510K that said this artificial pancreas is essentially substantially equivalent to these three independent devices? And we did it, and it worked. And so it opened my eyes to sort of the role of creative thinking in the area of medical devices. And that creative thinking is still going on today. There is an opportunity for creativity in the what's known as the 510K process, which is establishing substantial equivalence to devices that are on the marketplace. And so it is a place where strategizing about, you know, how to go about the regulatory approval does pay benefits. The final class is the Class 3 device, and these are known as PMAs, where implantable devices like pacemakers and other very sophisticated devices must go through a full protocol with FDA. And frankly, my assessment is that FDA will certainly do that, and they want to, but they would really prefer, if they can, to use the 510K mechanism as a more appropriate mechanism for regulating devices that are beyond the Class 1 basics. Now, another thing I wanted to point out as a footnote, because I've had clients get into this business and say, well, we're not going to really sell a device, we're going to sell a cosmetic, or we're going to sell something that's just sort of an accessory, so we don't need any approval, right? Not right. And so making something which is intended to be used as an accessory to a device becomes a device, and it becomes important to have the device manufactured subject to quality agreements, to establishments which are registered with FDA, and all basically following the requirements that FDA imposes on device manufacturers. Now, Baker Donaldson's role in this context is we really provide a lot of support to our clients in a lot of different ways. And we certainly have the ability to provide some strategic regulatory and commercial guidance. We represent any number of pharma companies, medical device companies, and in different contexts. I myself sometimes act as general counsel to an emerging company. At other times, I will be called in to do a risk assessment on an acquisition. At other times, Baker Donaldson will be involved in helping prioritize the IP, and that's not just patents and trademarks, but also the NDAs, the 510Ks, the other intangible properties that go with a startup activity. We obviously, as Bruce was pointing out, will talk extensively about the appropriate organization for a startup company. And then, of course, when the inevitable happens and somebody sues somebody, we're there for litigation and other purposes. So the last thing that I would point at, and this is, I think, another thing which should be kept in mind, is the globalization of this industry. My client base extends from Turkey to Japan to Australia, and it is becoming more global, not less global. Many of my clients have existing supply agreements with Chinese manufacturers. Many of my clients import medical devices that are made in the Netherlands or in Belgium. And things like country of origin, import-export regulations are quite important.